Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business and People podcast. I'm your host, Walt Bayliss. Today, we have somebody incredible on the show who has a master's in psychology. She's currently going for her doctorate in psychology. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a published author, and she focuses in on mental well-being. She's got something on her profile which I really want to dig into, which is talking about minimizing psychological injury. And we're going to really dive into that. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show Miss Tasha Broomhall. Tasha, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you with us. Now, Tasha, you've really focused in on the psychological side of human beings. And we were talking just before we clicked record. You've traveled everywhere, helping people from remote communities all the way through, and I'm reading your bio there, to big organizations, individuals. How did you get started into the psychological area of human well-being?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I started off working in workplace mental health 20 years ago now. So I studied disability, worked in the disability field for a while, then went back and studied psychology. And the organisation that I got my first posting at was a psychological, they call themselves psychiatric vocational rehabilitation. So the idea was that we would look at how we could either help people back into employment who had mental health issues as a barrier to employment, or who might be currently employed but whose mental health issues was proving a bit of a barrier for them maintaining that employment. So we worked under some models with some training from some people from Boston in the US around psychiatric vocational rehab, and I found that a really fascinating area to work in. I was really surprised with how different mental health in reality was than what I'd learnt at uni. So people who, I had a guy who was very senior in a hospitality organisation who was living with bipolar disorder, who had some barriers from his illness to employment. I had somebody I worked with who was a trolley collector at a local shopping centre who was living with schizophrenia. I had a mental health nurse who we did some work with who was living with depression. So I realised that mental health issues were just across the board relevant for people. It didn't discriminate who you were, where you worked. But I saw employment was a really strong part of people's recovery. Employment's such an important role in our society. One of the first things people ask you at a social event is, what do you do? We're so obsessed with people's work being part of who they are that if you can't participate in employment, it can be really limiting then in the social roles that you can engage with. And I saw that as a great way of being able to help people in their recovery.
Wow, awesome. And so you went out on your own with Blooming Minds. So it's bloomingminds.com.au, which is a mental health specialist organisation. And you went that direction to specifically help people in that area?
Yeah, so when probably about nearly 13 years ago, I went on maternity leave with my second baby from work, and I realised that I really didn't want to go back and do the same sort of reactive work. I wanted to do a lot more proactive work. And so I designed Blooming Minds around the idea of how we could help people in all sorts of workplaces to stay mentally well and to create mentally healthy workplaces so that the workplace wasn't causing any risks for their staff members. And, we see so much stress can be work originated or exacerbated. And so I saw that as a great opportunity to get in before things were manifesting.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. So looking at that history then, Tasha, you've got the understanding of the mental illness and also then looking at the stress component of that. I'm kind of putting words into your mouth here, but what I'm thinking is over the last 10 years, you would have seen a massive understanding of both of those issues coming to the forefront. So stress has been obviously tagged to so much in terms of our illness and our well-being. And of course, then along with that, the actual understanding or even acceptance of mental health being a real issue that people can deal with and doesn't have to be swept under the carpet. How have you seen those two things and the understanding of those two things change your business and the way that you're approaching businesses with the services that you offer?
Dramatically changed, not even in the 20 years I've been working in this field, just in the 12 years of business. When I first started, we were trying to convince people of the need to do this work. We were trying to talk to them about it's your obligation to create psychologically safe workplaces. You need to not have too much stress. You need to be able to respond to people appropriately without discrimination. Now, most organisations have already got a strong sense of that. We just now get to give them the skills of how to do that well. So it's a very different conversation. It used to be awareness raising, but like you say, this country's done awareness raising around mental health for a long time. Now what we get to do is skill development, and that's exciting.
That's great. Yeah, that's definitely. Is there a one of the things that I come across a lot, I speak to entrepreneurs and lots of people who are trying to, I guess, put food on the table, and they're trying to do it themselves by creating their own businesses and that kind of stuff. And stress is a massive component of that. Is there a standard way that you would help someone address what's going on and be able to work with them on that?
In terms of their own stress, do you mean? Yeah. Look, it's really complex because it has to be individualized.
Yeah, sure. It's probably the wrong question. Like, you can't have a one fix for all, but
no. But what you can do is have an overall framework that you would apply for an individual. So the overall framework, if I was working with, whether they be a small business owner or a leader in a large organization, it would be, from a personal perspective, what are the things that are causing you stress at the moment? How is that affecting you? What are the things that you need to put in place around that, of course? So we have a 4-step model that looks at governance, awareness, skills, and behaviour. And if we were to apply that to an individual level, governance is, in an organisational, that's policies and procedures. But at an individual level, we'd be looking at, well, what are your values? Okay. And are you living aligned with your values? And we know that as entrepreneurs, we so often have values-based business. We've designed something around the world we want to create and we want to be part of. But sometimes we get caught in the hustle and we're not actually aligning our actions with our values anymore. So from that governance perspective, I'd be looking at, what are your values? Are you living aligned with those? Because we know that that's a really important part of individual psychological well-being, and one we don't often focus on until something massive comes and slaps us up the side of the head. You know, we have a big illness or we have a life major change, and that's when we go, oh, I'm not doing the things that are important to me. I better get back on track. So if we can do that proactively, that can be really powerful for the individual. Then we'd look at, okay, what is your own knowledge of mental health and well-being, and what are the things you could be doing proactively? We would then look at what the skills are and then habitualizing that, so putting that into practice. Okay. And similar model for if it was an organisation. So organisation governance is, what are your policies and procedures in this space? What is it that people are meant to do around here? Then we'd look at the awareness levels, again, the skills required and behaviours.
Have you found that there's still a pushback from an executive level in businesses towards mental health issues at an employee level?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's seen still a little bit as, oh, this is fluff. But we're seeing less of that, to be honest. There is a really strong focus at an exec level on psychological safety and psychological injury risk in many businesses across Australia, because they recognise that it's costing them money if they don't. So they recognise the impacts in terms of absenteeism and presenteeism, the impacts if they have discrimination or if they don't meet their privacy obligations. There's real concerns in many businesses around, how do we reduce these costs and imposts? So we're seeing a lot less of the pushback. We're still seeing a little bit of so can't we just tick a box and go, we've done something for mental health? Can't we just, put on a lunch and tell everyone to call a helpline if they need it? So there's still a little bit of that tokenism in some organisations, but there's a lot less of the ignorance of the issue than what there used to be.
Nice. So you mentioned the phrase there that I spoke about in the introduction there, which is psychological injury. Now, if we look at from a workplace, there's always a push for safety, physical safety in terms of making sure that the workplace is a safe environment, etc. You mentioned psychological injury, making sure that a workplace is free from the risk of psychological injury. Tell me about that.
So we have obligations as employers to create safe workplaces and do no harm, and that includes psychologically. Generally, what we're talking about there is around stress-related workers' compensation claims. These are some of the most expensive and often the most time off work required
Yeah.
in terms of any workers' comp claims in Australia. What we're looking at in general are things like the lack of control that staff members might have, too high demands that they might have. So particularly in the current economic climate, lots of organisations are trying to be leaner and do more with less, which might mean that they're then overextending and expecting too much of some staff. That's a psychological injury risk potentially. We'd need to look at what are the potential inherent risks in a role. So, for example, some of my PhD research is working in looking at institutional silence and psychological risks in police officers and hospital-based doctors.
Wow.
And you can't take away the particular risks that they face. You know, they're dealing with trauma, they're dealing with people who may not want to be dealt with. So we can't take away all of those risks, but we do need to identify them and put controls around them. So it's really critical that, just like with regular safety, with the health and safety that focuses on, you know, appropriate equipment and appropriate shift breaks, etc., we need to do the same from a psychological perspective, identify what might be the inherent risks in this role and what are the controls we can put around them.
Wow. Okay. And has that, I guess, understanding that there is a risk of psychological injury, has that opened doors for you, like in terms of your business growth? Has that opened doors for you in terms of, you know, people understanding that that's a real thing? Hey, Tasha, come and talk to us about it. We really want to make sure we put something in place.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a lot more of that. When I started, you know, nearly 13 years ago, I was lucky that I started the business from a position of being a mum with a young baby. So I didn't have a lot of capacity for work. So I was getting enough work quite organically. But then as my kids got a bit older and I wanted to grow the business, I started to look around and think, okay, how do I grow this kind of business? How do I find out what the market needs and market to them? And I'm really fortunate that it's become a lot more of a prevalent topic. It's a point of discussion a lot more to look at psychological injuries in the workplace, because, as I said earlier, it's costing companies money. And so therefore they've started looking more for what we're doing, and they're looking for providers that can meet quite dynamic needs of some businesses. A lot of, you know, organizations, probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a really surface level need of, let's just say we're doing something in this space, and we're seeing a lot more sophisticated approaches being taken now, and that's where we have a role, because Blooming Minds' approach is to build capacity within the organisation. We don't see our job to come in and put on some, you know, some events for you that you can then go, oh, tick, we're doing it. Our job is to build your capacity to create positive psychological cultures. And so we're seeing now we're in a very fortunate position that we've got as much work as we can handle.
That's great. That's good. Can I speak about that just for a moment? Because as I mentioned, the group that are listening to us are entrepreneurs, starting a business, etc. When you were starting out Blooming Minds, as you said, you're a new mom. How did you find it? Like, how did you juggle that whole thing?
Yeah, it was really tricky at times. I remember, you know, I had with my second baby that I had while the business was running, he came 4 weeks early. So my children generally have come quite late. So I've worked, you know, up until they arrive. But this little one decided to come early. And I remember having been asked to do a keynote at a very large, very significant conference. And I said to them when they booked me, look, as long as you know that I'll be very, very pregnant, that'll be fine by me. But as long as you're okay, that if anything untoward happened and the baby came early, I'd pull out. And they said, yeah, no problem. But I didn't think that would happen. Right. And then, of course, the baby came 4 weeks early. And so by the time the conference came around, I had a 2-week-old baby. And luckily, my husband had taken some leave. And so he was able to come along and sit in the green room. And I fed the baby and then went on stage. And, you know, so I had to be really flexible, but I was really fortunate that I had the support of my husband to be able to be flexible around. But I mean, even for my first baby, I was giving a lecture when she was a week old. So it's not because I had expected her to be born quite a bit earlier than she was. But I think that flexibility has probably been the biggest skill set that I've had that's enabled me to build a dynamic business around 3 children. And, you know, I just feel really I feel really lucky that I get to balance both of those things, but that's not to say it's not really, really hard work.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
haven't, I've learnt how to put in place some structures to maximize
Hmm.
that work. So for example, this month I'm doing a lot of this, like this, interviewing and talking with people from my desk, rather than doing in-person courses, because this week I've got this month I've got 3 kids who are settling into significant years in their education. So I wanted to be here for before and after school runs, and
Yeah,
to be
sure.
present for them. So
Stability.
I'm fortunate that this wasn't my first year in business, because it would have been very hard to prioritize that time,
Yeah.
but I have managed to get to that stage now.
What would you do differently, Tasha, now that you have the wisdom of a mother of 3, now that you have the 12 years of business already under your belt, and obviously the business environment has changed along with that, but what would you do differently now that you have that experience?
I would have got business mentoring earlier. So
Hmm.
I have 2 business mentors that have been with me since almost the beginning, but their focus for both of them is on the psychological field.
Okay.
So they both come from that background.
Hmm.
So I have really strong support in that area. I didn't get as strong support with actual business development
Okay.
until more recently. And I think that I would have learnt lessons a bit quicker if I'd had that support earlier.
Okay.
And I get that now from a range of different modes. I've learnt that it's not going to be necessarily just one area that I get that support in. So I have a regular group of business women that I get together with every 6 weeks, and we do business development
Nice.
work. And I also have a mastermind that I'm part of with another group that meets every 8 weeks, and that's a little bit more strategy
Okay.
based. And so those groups have really helped me transform the business. And we're in a growth phase at the moment in Blooming Minds. We're just launching some new online programs and some whole of organizational development programs. And I've had the ideas for these for about 5 years. We did all of the work and research about 4 years ago, knowing that they were really valuable products for market, but I didn't have the nous of how to bring them to market until the last 18 months. So
Wow.
I wish I'd had the knowledge of what I didn't know,
Yeah.
5 years ago, and we might have been able to bring them to market already. But having said that, I'm also really philosophical that you know what you know when you know it.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe now's the time that I had enough of the other experience and knowledge to really take advantage of this anyway. So no regrets, really.
Do you have the no regret? It couldn't have happened at any other time. It was supposed to happen at that time. But
Maybe, yeah.
did the groups, the support groups that you were a member of, help you bring those skills together, or like
100%.
how did that happen?
Yeah, 100%. So as I said, a couple of different groups, and I've been involved in different groups over the years, and at different times have had different needs. So that's another thing, that flexibility of going, this group's meeting my need at the moment. No, it's not at the moment, has been really useful. So
Sure.
I don't tend to get bogged down in, not wanting to offend anybody because this isn't meeting my needs anymore. I think that they're reciprocal relationships. And if I'm not getting my needs met, I won't be serving anyone else either.
Yes.
But certainly, like even the new program that we're launching at the moment, our Champions program, I went through that with a fine-tooth comb with a bunch of colleagues in that business group, and just got some phenomenal feedback from some of them in that particular group are in really senior positions in large organisations that are my target clients. I've never worked in those large organisations, so they were able to give me some insights in terms of what the market actually needs and the language that's used around that I wouldn't have been able to figure out myself. So yeah, that's one thing that as a solopreneur early on, I didn't realize how many networks and supports there were that you could actually connect with like-minded people and support each other.
That's very, very cool. That is, and I'm on that. Is there an upskilling that you do on a regular basis, being in that field, when you pick up something like, for example, your online courses, which I'm just looking at the moment on the site there, so people can come through and get some self-assessments and that kind of stuff going through, which is fantastic, and then go through courses to help them deal with stress and deal with all kinds of different things that they're working with. Do you find yourself in a skill shortage and say, okay, I need to skill up, I need to book up? Or are you taking tasks and outsourcing them? Like, how are you handling the new areas of your business?
Yeah, both. So I generally sit down at the beginning of the year and set my business goals for the year.
Mm-hmm.
I chunk it down roughly into quarters, but it's quite fluid. I then look at what I currently know that I need to know. And that does change throughout the year. Sometimes I realize, oh, I thought I had this, but no, I don't, and I need to go find it.
Yep.
I'll either jump on somebody else's course, I'll buy a book, I'll listen to some podcasts, or I'll hire somebody, depending on what is going to be the quickest way for me to get that need met.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've actually found businesses who run public or private courses, and I've just hired them to do a one-on-one with me. Yep. Because I know if I go and spend a day with them in their public course, what I can learn in 3 hours intensive just with me is going to be much better use of my time. Yeah, okay. So I'll take whichever approach is needed. But I also love hiring people that have got different skill sets, because I may not be able to learn things in the same way that they are, so they might be able to bring something different. So we have a range of people that we hire on a casual basis. Mm-hmm. And we also work with interns with one of the local universities, which I am loving, because they just bring the most unique and dynamic perspectives to some of our work, and that's been really enriching as well.
Nice. It would be good to have those fresh eyes, I guess, and they'd be keen to impress and keen to bring their knowledge out and that kind of stuff as well. So that would bring a big energy, I would imagine, into the scope.
And it can be really exciting, because we've now hired one of them. So she does an ongoing project with our magazine. That's great. And she's still doing her, she's doing her psychology honours at the moment. So we're giving her some runs on the board to start her career. So we're giving her some benefit, but we get phenomenal benefit from her knowledge and energy as well.
Nice. Very, very cool. Now, talking of knowledge and delivering that in a certain way, your TEDx talks are something else. How did you get into that environment?
Look, they just rang me. I don't quite know how it happened. They rang one day and I was in the middle of something and said, oh, yeah, I'm not really sure, ring me back. I didn't really take it very seriously. I was a really big TED fan and thought, this sounds a bit weird, I'm not quite sure. And then they emailed and they said, look, you haven't rung us back. We're really interested. And I went, oh, yeah, okay. And then they emailed again. And my husband said, what are you dragging your feet about? And I said, oh, I get such value from it myself. I don't know if I could be of any value. I was feeling a little bit, nervous about putting myself on that stage.
Am I good enough to?
But you talk to thousands of people at a conference all the time. And I was like, yeah, but not under the TED brand. Yeah. So it was a really interesting process to go through in my own confidence and willingness to put my name out there. And it was really funny, because I finally agreed to do it, and we organised what my topic would be. And then the night before, I had the Christmas party with a couple of the girls that were working with me at the time. And I had said to my husband, look, I want to run through my talk with you before I go out for dinner, and then I'll feel really prepared for tomorrow. And so he and my daughter, who at the time, she must have been, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, maybe a bit younger. They were sitting in the lounge room, I remember presenting to them, and they were both stony-faced the whole time. And then at the end of it, they both said, no, it's not very good. No, that won't work. And I just felt devastated, because there was nothing I could do at that point. I was like, I'm out for a Christmas party now, and then I'm on tomorrow morning. So I just felt really struck. And then I thought, no, I'm just going to go out there and I'm just going to do what comes. I'm just going to be present, and I'm going to try and serve the audience. And so my sister and my husband came with me to the day, and I was on very late in the day. And they both sat next to me, and they were kind of levitating in nerves the whole day, to the point that about mid-morning I said to them, oh, I've got to go backstage now. I'm not allowed to be here anymore, which wasn't true.
You just wanted to be apart from them.
Yeah. From them. I knew that I had my own nerves to deal with. I couldn't deal with theirs. And so I just went backstage and meditated, and then went out and did it, and it was fine. The earth didn't swallow up me or anything awful like that. And it was actually an incredibly fun experience. Awesome. At the end of the day. But it was a really funny process to get there.
Do you know, it's funny, the concept of not being worthy. I mean, looking at what you've achieved and where you've come from, and I think so many of us struggle with that concept of self-worth, you know, in terms of, am I really good enough to deliver something right now to this group of professionals and group of people? How do you feel in that regard now that you've ticked that TEDx box twice?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is that when I get in my head thinking about me, that's when that imposter comes through, that
Right.
imposter syndrome comes through. But when I actually instead think of, what are my values? Why am I doing this work? What is it that I'm trying to create in the world? And how can I serve these people? When I get myself in that head and heart space, then it all just flows, and I no longer have an expectation that I have to do it perfectly or serve everybody. But I do have a belief that I have to turn up and be present and possibly serve somebody.
Nice.
And I won't always know who that is, and I'm okay with that. And maybe that just gives me a free pass out of the stress, because it's not about me as much as I might just say something that might resonate for one person, and that might be really helpful.
Yeah.
And that aligns with my values. And I think I've probably been really fortunate that I've had lots of people after events email or ring or send cards or bump into me somewhere else and tell me, oh, that one thing you said did this.
Wow.
And sometimes it's the last thing I would have expected that resonated with somebody. So therefore, I now give myself permission to not overthink it and just do the work and see what happens.
Wow, that's really cool. That's awesome. I think the ability to, especially in that environment where you have to deliver something to a group of people, to take the emphasis off yourself and more about into the what you can deliver. I think that would help a lot of people definitely moving forward. So Tasha, what's next for you? Like, I mean, let's look at these online courses that you've launched with Blooming Minds. So that's bloomingminds.com.au. You guys can head along and really start to touch base with Tasha and find out how you can insulate yourself. I guess that's the wrong word, but how you can fortify yourself in the world of personal stress, in the world of mental health. You've got the courses aimed at leadership in businesses, so talking to that kind of leadership group. But you also have, I guess, the Champions program, which is that next step up from that as well. So, what's the scope of working with you, and where will that see you moving forward from there?
So this year we've got a huge leap in terms of our offerings. So the current online course for leaders is being relaunched end of March, and that'll just be a new updated version that's a lot more focused on the ideas that can be implemented straight away. We've got a personal psychological wellbeing program being launched then as well, which is based on my master's research around how we improve our personal wellbeing. So we call it beyond stress and resilience. So it's not just about how do you deal with bad things when they happen, it's how do you build for buoyancy with your mental wellbeing ongoing. So that's launching late March. We've got our own podcast launching. So we're starting off with an audio version of our magazine. I've done a lot of work over the last 15 years with clients who are deaf and also clients who are vision impaired. And one of the things that's come up with our vision impaired clients is, could you put the magazine into an audio file? So we're starting off with that. Our magazine that currently comes out 3 times a year will be launched. We've been recording today, so that's been exciting. So that'll be launched soon as an audio, and then that'll branch out into a podcast. I've got 2 new books coming out this year. So one about personal wellbeing and one about leaders and workplace cultures. So we've got a lot of really exciting stuff happening. And the Champions program it feels like the most exciting bit of all of our work ever, really, because what we're looking to do is train up people in organisations to then go and do the sort of work that we would normally do, but to do themselves within the organisation, building awareness skills of mental wellbeing, so that they don't have to have someone like me come in as much.
That's a ripples in a pond kind of experience, that one.
Yeah. Which just feels really exciting. So we've got a whole bunch of videos and training programs that the champions will get, and they'll have a vault of information they can access and a whole bunch of different org development processes that we'll teach them in. And we're really excited because it feels like we'll be truly building capacity.
That's really great, Tash. That's really
Yeah.
awesome. So that will see the work that you've put 15 years into reaching so many more people because you'll have
Yeah.
those champions out there. So 2 books coming out, podcasts coming out.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of work in front, and of course, juggling the skills of motherhood as well, as long as you go. Hats off to you. I think it's absolutely amazing to see how that's all come together for you over the last 12 years. And so the Champions program, is that something that you're active marketing right now? You're looking for people out there who are getting involved? Great. So if people are curious about that, if they want to become a champion in their own workplace for mental health and start to learn some of the skills and, as you said, the frameworks to be able to put that in place, they can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just send us an email, info@bloomingminds.com.au, and we'll then talk to them about who are the organisations it's most suited for. It's not going to be the right model for every organisation. These are usually medium to large sized organisations, and we'd give them some information that they can then make a good business assessment for themselves.
Fantastic. Very, very cool. Tasha, what is something in the mental health space that still hasn't been talked about enough?
I don't think we talk enough at all about proactively supporting mental well-being for ourselves and others. I think that of the last 20 years, we've had this big, sexy PR campaign around mental illness, but we haven't talked about mental well-being enough. And mental illness is important to talk about, but it's not the only part of the continuum. If we look at mental health lying along a continuum, why wait until people are unwell? Why shouldn't we, for others and for ourselves, be more proactive and catch ourselves when we get into a bit of a funk, or when we're a bit overwhelmed, or when we're dying from busyitis, which is just the big disease of the moment, is to just be overly busy and think it makes us more important. But instead, how could we catch those patterns and get ourselves back on track? And how could we recognize it in someone else and support them early? I think that that's the next challenge for this country, for sure.
Nice, fantastic. How do you deal with it personally? How do you get past busyitis with that list that you just reeled off there, which is an incredibly huge workload to do?
I'm very, very fortunate that my husband is the at-home parent in our family.
Awesome.
And we have a lovely synergy there where for many years we were both working part-time. So I only worked part-time when the kids were little, as did he. And then as they've gotten a bit older, my work capacity was increasing. And then Craig was made redundant in his job. And so we looked at it and went, well, I'm really enjoying my work. Could I sink my teeth in for a while? And so we decided to make that work for our family. And I've always been really good at outsourcing household things because, I would much rather, when I get home from work, play with my kids than clean a toilet. So we've managed to put those balances into the structure of how our family works. And then I've also got really strong plans for myself. I've struggled with anxiety at different times in my life, so I know what my limits are. So I've got really good self-care plans around the Fab 5 things that I need to make sure that I'm ticking off every day to engage in positive, proactive habits that balance my mental health. Doesn't mean that it doesn't sometimes still get a bit wonky, but I'm really good at looking at that and going, how interesting, I need to change some priorities at the moment. Hence this month not having much work on, because I knew that it would be important for my mental well-being to be present for the kids as they got into their new years at school. So it's just been about proactively managing it, I think.
Nice. It's a nice reality of being an entrepreneur to be able to design the life around what else is happening as well, which is awesome. Tash, thank you so much. I value the time, and I know we haven't dug in anywhere near deep enough as to what people can be doing in their own workplaces, what bosses can be doing to make sure that their employees are in a safe psychological environment, and what individuals can be doing to make sure that they are protecting themselves from the stresses and the things that we know that are out there literally attacking the mental health and the mental well-being of everyone that's around us in these days. I haven't dug into that anywhere near enough. Hopefully we can get you back on the podcast once the books come out. You can tell us a little bit more. But for now, guys, you can go to bloomingminds.com.au, touch base with Tash there and find out how you can go through some of those self-assessments and some of those mental well-being programs that that Tasha's got set up there. And of course, if you're in a workplace environment, you can bring some of those areas in and even get involved in the Champions program, and be a leader in terms of making sure that that's a well-known thing. Tasha Broomhall, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see these books hit the shelves, to hear about all of the adventures as you're moving forward. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.